It's 1,000 degrees in here today. I'm sweating my balls off. I'm not okay, which makes this the perfect time to talk about the Dillinger escape plan. Why not? Fuck it. If I had a pool, maybe I would jump in, but I don't. So instead, I'll sit here and suffer with the Dillinger escape plan. Good morning, metalheads of the internet, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Metal Meltdown. Today we are going to review every single studio album from American Mathcore gods, the Dillinger Escape Plan. Without question, one of the most unique, iconic, influential, exciting, and punishing metal bands of the 21st century, of the 2000s and the 2010s. Unfortunately, they disbanded a couple of years back, but their legacy lives on through all of these incredible records, which we will talk about today in this video. As per the norm with all of these reviewing every album style videos, I am looking mostly at the band's studio albums. With one exception, I am not interested in EPs, demos, live albums, or compilations, nor am I interested in any albums released by side projects or by solo projects or anything like that. I will be looking at each album in order of release, assigning each a score out of 5, 0 being the worst, 5 being the best. Dillinger Escape Plan consistently has a really good discography. I honestly don't think a single album will get anything lower than a 3, maybe. That's it. With all of this in mind, let's officially get started with Calculating Infinity, the band's debut studio album, released September 28th, 1999, via Relapse and Hydra Head Records. You would think that the Dillinger Escape Plan, a band who would go on to become flag bearers, poster boys, icons of American Mathcore, would probably need an album or two to really work out the kinks, to really figure some shit out. I mean, let's just look at the facts here. Not every rock, metal, prog, or punk band immediately gets a home run on the first album, you know? Sometimes it takes a couple of albums to figure things out. You know, this is certainly the case for Metallica, Slayer, Green Day. Sometimes it takes up to a decade to really figure out who you are and what you want to do. This is the case for Judas Priest and the Red Hot Chili Peppers. But sometimes you get really fucking lucky and you knock it out of the park on your first fucking try. This was the case for Exodus, this was the case for Guns N' Roses, and it is also most certainly the case for the Dillinger Escape Plan. Calculating Infinity is an absolutely intense, chaotic, schizophrenic, metalcore, hardcore, mathcore nightmare of epic proportions, and it has not aged a fucking day. The songs are so twisted and so angular. The performances, the energy of this record is so violent, and the production is surprisingly crisp and polished. This feels like metalcore and hardcore's answer to something like Obscura from Gorguts. Like, there's so much on this record that doesn't make sense, that shouldn't make sense, that shouldn't work, and yet it does. And as such, it's an absolute thrill to listen to. Like, I actually hadn't listened to this album in a while before doing this video, and I was genuinely taken aback by how brutal and how technical and how bloodthirsty this thing is after, like, 23, 22 years. I mean, you've got so many killer fucking tracks on here, like Jim Fear, 43% Burnt, Sugar Coated Sour, the title track, Calculating Infinity, Fourth Grade Dropout. It's all just fantastic. There's a manicy and an urgency to this that is addictive and thrilling and exhilarating. Worth noting, this is the band's only studio album with Dimitri Minakakis on vocals. Apologies if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. He hasn't really done much since leaving the Dillinger Escape Plan, which I think is a shame, but, you know, credit where it's due. The man gives an absolutely insane performance on this fucking record. Yeah, I fucking love this record, man. This is a very strong 4 out of 5 for me. It may lack the diversity and the artistry of other Dillinger Escape Plan records that came after this, but I mean, it's wild, it's frantic, it's brutal. The sheer technicality of this thing is absurd, it's mind-blowing. I mean, what more can you really want from just a really great kind of 90s mathcore record? It's just a fucking blast to listen to. Next up, we have Irony is a Dead Scene, released August 27th, 2002, via Epitaph Records and Buddyhead. This is not a studio album, this is in fact an EP. We are talking about this because the Dillinger Escape Plan, somehow, following the departure of Dimitri, managed to get Mike Patton of Mr. Bungle and Faith No More fame to sing lead vocals on this EP, and the end result is every bit as orgasmically insane as you expect it to be. The album very wisely builds on the momentum of Calculating Infinity, and similarly is a very intense and technical record, but some of the weirder kind of melodic alternative metal stuff that Mike Patton is famous for through Mr. Bungle and through Faith No More, some of those vibes and flavors and spices and influences have crept over into the Dillinger Escape Plan. And the result is absolutely fascinating. You've got Pig Latin, for instance, which has these very tight, anguished grooves and mathcore beatdowns kind of woven in between these sections of ritualistic chanting and weird, horrific sound effects, and Mike Patton just being an absolute fucking weirdo. You've also got Hollywood Squares, which is this demented, crazed number which almost appears to find a sweet spot in between the more aggressive Faith No More material and some of the really obtuse Mr. Bungle material. Then there's When Good Dogs Do Bad Things, which arguably finds this kind of sweet, sticky, caramelly, nougaty center in between the two tracks we just mentioned. I mean, it's got these calm, meditative sequences and these dreary melodies and these really punishing riffs and breakdowns and these weirder, darker, spookier moments. It's just a wild fucking number. And the killer is, this is only an EP. There's only 4 fucking songs on here. It's only like 18 minutes long. And it's an appetizer, basically, and I feel like I've had one of the spiciest, most flavorful main courses ever. Like, this record just has me salivating for more moments after it's done. Hell, moments before it's done, I'm like getting Spotify ready to just start this thing all over again. Very easy 4.5 out of 5 for me. Damn near close to a 5 out of 5. I fucking love this EP. This is one of the best EPs ever fucking made. I think Mike Patton should seriously continue calling up members of the Dillinger Escape Plan for some kind of project. Maybe he can bring them into Dead Cross or Mr. Bungle or do something else entirely. I don't know. Here's what I do know. I want more of this now. Please and thank you. That would be fucking amazing. I'm hungry. Please and thank you. Next up, we have Miss Machine, released July 20th, 2004, via Relapse Records. And this album is fascinating for a number of reasons. It is their official sophomore album. It is their first with Greg Pachado on lead vocals. It is, in a lot of ways, a continuation of what Calculating Infinity and Irony is a Dead Scene did so well. It's weird, it's loud, technical, bombastic. The usual influences remain, and there are new influences creeping in from jazz fusion and electronic music. At the same time, though, I would argue this is the band's most accessible album. Like, if you didn't know who the Dillinger Escape Plan were at all, this is the album I would recommend you check out. It has some slower tempos from time to time. It's not as uncompromising or as bloodthirsty as Calculating Infinity. It also has some hooks, it has melodies, it has clean vocals from time to time. It's a more straightforward album in some aspects, with some more straightforward songwriting and some more atypical structures commonly found within, like, hardcore and metalcore of the time. very simply put, while there is a lot of stuff going on, I think ultimately this just has a more accessible kind of feel and vibe to it in comparison to what the Dillinger Escape Plan has done so far, and even in comparison to what the Dillinger Escape Plan would go on to do. Look at Highway Robbery, for instance. I mean, it's got some janky, twisted, angular riffs and some really aggressive screamed vocals, but it's also got some crooning vocals later on with some minimalistic percussion and a very dramatic ending, and even the main hook kind of feels like something that wouldn't be out of place on a post-hardcore song of the time. There's also Sunshine the Werewolf, which kind of goes for all these different phases and transformations, coincidentally not too dissimilar from that of an actual werewolf. I mean, it can get pretty rabid, it can get pretty wild, but there's also this really bold, dynamic chorus and some more, like, flashy, dynamic kind of prog metal guitar noodling here and there. And then there's Setting Fire to Sleeping Giants, which is sung almost entirely in clean vocals. I mean, it's kind of all over the place still. Greg's vocals, you know, his range is insane, and he absolutely flexes that range on this cut, but not to the point where I could picture him, like, really scaring or freaking somebody out. These little moments are why I see this as being a more accessible record, and they're also why I would see this as being a more engaging record than Calculating Infinity. I mean, this is overall just more memorable, it's more punchy, it's more expressive and more diverse. There's real genuine growth here. You feel the Dillinger Escape Plan kind of coming into their own. They're more confident and more comfortable than ever before, and I love that. So yeah, even though it's not as technical or as brutal or as mind-blowingly odd as some other stuff we've heard so far, I think it still really holds up. I still think it's a great album. I would give it a strong 4 out of 5. And once again, I would say that if you are somehow unfamiliar with the Dillinger Escape Plan, this is the album you need to look out for. This is the album you should start with. Next up, we have Ironworks, released November 5th, 2007 via Relapse Records, and we have arrived, ladies and gentlemen, at what I feel is the Dillinger Escape Plan's best album, one of the best Mathcore albums ever made, if not maybe the best, and one of the best metal albums of the 21st century. This is a culmination of everything the band has done so well on everything else, on Calculating Infinity, Irony is a Dead Scene, Miss Machine, with more new elements, better production. The band is more confident, more comfortable, more charismatic, more experimental, more everything. I mean, the recording process was not perfect from what I understand. Ben Wyman ended up doing a lot of the guitar work himself because there was some kind of injury preventing Brian from contributing. I don't know the specifics off the top of my head, but regardless, it has resulted in an absolute fucking masterpiece of insane, brutal, weird, and epic proportions. Tracks like Fix Your Face and Lurch match the intensity and the sheer insanity of Calculating Infinity while channeling the weirder elements of subsequent records. Nong Ai Gon is an absolutely carnivorous mathcore rager with some more melodic, funky riffs that would not be out of place on a Mastodon record of the time. And then there's Milk Lizard and Black Bubblegum, which are genuinely addictively catchy. They dig into your skull like literal fucking earworms. And they still remain really intense, really freaky. Black Bubblegum in particular is a really eerie cut with some awesome fucking lyrics, and Milk Lizard has some of the best riffs on the album and some of the best riffs Dillinger Escape Plan have ever unleashed. And then there's the closing track, Mouth of Ghosts, which is surprisingly very lush, very atmospheric. It has these, like, really beautiful kind of guitar and piano arrangements with this kind of Sympathy for the Devil style percussion that just kind of grows louder and louder throughout the track. It makes for a really great climax of the record and a really nice palate cleanser following the absolute absurdity of the rest of Ironworks. The electronic elements are a lot more prominent on this record, which I really like. There's a lot of industrial and synth pop shit kind of going on here. There's a lot of alt metal stuff going on here. You know, the Faith No More influence left by Mike Patton remains very much so present on Ironworks. Production-wise, this thing is amazing. Nothing is buried, everything is balanced, everything gets a moment to shine in the spotlight, everything is visible in the forefront. It really is just kind of remarkable. Strong 5 out of 5 from me. The Dillinger Escape Plan put their all into this record. Their best lyrics, their best performances, their best riffs, their best beats, their best fucking everything. And it fucking shows. Ironworks is a masterpiece. It is the album I listen to more than anything else in the Dillinger Escape Plan's discography. I will love this album till the day I die, and possibly even beyond that. Next up, we have Option Paralysis, released March 23rd, 2010, via Party Smasher Incorporated and Season of Mist. In a lot of ways, this feels like a return to form, to the sound of Miss Machine. It is definitely, I think, musically a little less weirder than Ironworks. But I mean, this is still a pretty weird record, and in a lot of ways, I think one of the band's most challenging records, like lyrically speaking. Greg has gone out of his way to say that he feels that this is the band's most personal and honest record. I'm just going to pull this from Wikipedia because there's no way I'm going to be able to remember this. The title, Option Paralysis, is a concept referring to an individual paralyzed by an overload of options. Ben Weinman cited this as a general concern of the band, whose members grew up in underground scenes, but by the time of the album were witnessing young people absorbed in modern technology, which they believed homogenized culture and caused almost a cultural depression. The singer was immersed in absurdist philosophy at the time, reading authors such as Søren Kierkegaard and particularly Albert Camus's work, including The Stranger, The Plague, Exile in the Kingdom, and The Myth of Sisyphus. The lyrics were composed in free association, and Pachado believes that they unearthed subconscious issues he had, but chose to keep them private. At the time of its release, Option Paralysis was also the band's longest album yet. Ben Weinman described it as also being their most metal album yet. So yeah, even though it's not as insane musically as Ironworks, it's still tight, it's still intense, and there's still a lot going on, just like Ironworks. And it does make, I would say, for Dillinger Escape Plan's most contemplative record. Like, I really find myself analyzing a lot of these lyrics more so than I would for other records that came before or after this. I find myself really looking at a lot of the themes and ideas expressed musically and lyrically. I notice here that Greg definitely feels a lot more unhinged in a lot of aspects. You know, it's definitely clear, even without reading all of that, that, you know, their mental health was maybe not in the greatest spot at the time. There was definitely stuff going on, to be blunt. And yeah, unsurprisingly, it results in some awesome fucking material. I mean, Farewell Mona Lisa, Good Neighbor, Gold Teeth on a Bum, Roomful of Eyes, Chinese Whispers, Parasitic Twins, all of these songs are so fucking awesome. They're unpredictable, they're savage, they feel like a really good fusion of Miss Machine and Ironworks in a lot of aspects. It's intense, it's dramatic, it's introspective, it's everything I love about the Dillinger Escape Plan, with some genuine, you know, thought-provoking ideas, some maturity, which I think is really great. I'm going to go with a 4.5 out of 5 for this record. You know, Ironworks is still the jam, but I would say this is my second favorite Dillinger Escape Plan record. I mean, there's a lot I love about this fucking album. Next up, we have One of Us Is the Killer, released May 14th, 2013 via Party Smasher Incorporated and Sumerian Records. And this holds a pretty special place in my heart because this was the first time I listened to the Dillinger Escape Plan. And for that matter, it was probably one of the first times I really heard anything like Mathcore or avant-garde metal or experimental metal or anything like that. From what I understand, around the time that Dillinger Escape Plan began working on writing this record, began jamming and like producing this record, they were listening to like a lot of like classic punk and hardcore from the 80s because, around this time, a lot of bands that Greg really loved were reuniting, and he was kind of fired up and inspired by that. The band also experiments with a lot of convoluted rhythms on this thing, a lot of weird patterns and time signatures. I would say at times this almost feels like something I would expect from Meshuggah. I mean, the album's lead single and opening track, Prancer, even has these, like, massive triplets and these really metallic, groove-laden chugs that certainly bring to mind Meshuggah for me. And at the same time, there's also a little bit more empty space. Like, I think there's more room for Greg to kind of breathe on this record, which is great because he's constantly throwing these really great vocal performances and spats at you, screaming and yelling, clean vocals. The hooks are really dynamic and catchy, and I think it makes for simultaneously a really exciting record and, like, a really dramatic, horrifying record. Like, I remember being genuinely scared by a lot of what this record did when I listened to it for the first time in 2013, and honestly, there are parts of this now that remain genuinely kind of freaky. Like When I Lost My Bet is this razor-sharp, anguished mathcore rager. The album's title track, One of Us is the Killer, is spooky and mysterious, and it takes its sweet-ass fucking time. Nothing's Funny has these really chunky and obtuse riffs paired with some weirder melodies that definitely brings to mind, like, some of the heavier and weirder aspects of mid-90s Faith No More. The threat posed by nuclear weapons remains every bit as stark and poignant and provocative now as it was in 2013. In fact, I'd argue it's actually aged better with time, considering these really bizarre dystopian circumstances that we find ourselves living in 2022. And, like Hero of the Soviet Union, Understanding Decay, Crossburner, it's all just really fucking fantastic stuff. Ben Weinman said that he thought Option Paralysis was his most metal record. I disagree. I think this is the band's most metal record. I mean, there's so many huge, chunky, metallic riffs and beatdowns on this fucking thing. And I love it. It makes this feel a little bit more distinct and unique. This, for me, is another very strong 4.5 out of 5. It remains incredibly effective, incredibly powerful, incredibly incredible, really. And finally, this brings us to Dissociation, released October 14th, 2016, via Party Smasher Incorporated and Cooking Vinyl, the band's 6th and final full-length studio album, before disbanding about a year later at the end of 2017. And I'm just gonna say it, this is probably the band's worst album. It is still a very good album, but I never have found myself returning to this as often as I found myself returning to other records that we've talked about, and upon re-listening to it, I didn't have the same enthusiasm for this that I had for other records that I hadn't re-listened to in a bit, like Calculating Infinity. It's intense, it's jarring, it's everything I love about the Dillinger Escape Plan, and yet, for me, it's not quite as impactful. I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that in comparison to other records that the Dillinger Escape Plan has made, this isn't as unpredictable. I mean, this is still pretty wild shit, but by this point in their career, the Dillinger Escape Plan had an established formula, a shtick, if you will. And this record doesn't really stray from that shtick all that often. And on top of that, the songs are also a lot longer. It feels a little bit bloated, like the album is 50 minutes long, and even though that isn't like a gigantic amount of time, you do kind of feel the heft and the weight of all these songs as they do kind of drag on and they repeat certain sections and they just kind of keep hammering you with all these gnarly fucking riffs and beats. So yeah, all things considered, not a perfect record, not an incredible one, not a great one, but still a good one. And I would say, all things considered, probably a really strong album to end a career on. I mean, the performances are still, like, next level awesome. I mean, Greg is still a fantastic fucking singer, still a fantastic fucking songwriter. I like the way he kind of structures his verses and his lyrics and his hooks around the instrumentals on this record. Like, from what I understand, he kind of had all the instrumental stuff done beforehand, and he would just listen to that on repeat over and over and over again to try and get the right hook, the right lyric, the right everything. The record is very meticulous in that sense, which I do like as well. Still lots of great material here, warts and all. I mean, Limerent Death, Symptoms of Terminal Illness, Honeysuckle, these are legit awesome songs. I would hold them up there with, like, some of the best material from other albums that we've talked about in this video. There's a real urgency to this record that is admirable. Like, Dillinger Escape Plan knew that this was going to be their final album. They planned for this to be their final album, and they put all that they could into this album. I would simply argue it's a bit too much, and I would argue again that it's just not as impactful as Ironworks, as Option Paralysis, as other records we've talked about today. I would still give this a pretty enthusiastic 3.5 out of 5, but I stand by my claim that this is their worst album. To be fair, their worst album is better than most bands' best album, but it is their worst album nonetheless. This is where I realize that it is for the best that the Dillinger Escape Plan did disband, because had they fallen into a rut and just made records like this over and over again, I probably would have gotten very tired of them very quickly. But they didn't. Thank God. They realized they were done. They realized there was nothing more they could contribute to the scene, to the genre, to the movement. They disbanded, and they left us with a pretty fantastic discography. I mean, Dissociation is still a really fucking good record. Like, that's not up for debate. It might not be their best in my opinion, but it's still a really good record. And considering the fact that all of these records are really good, who knows? Maybe it will end up being your favorite record, or maybe your favorite will be Calculating Infinity, or something else entirely. And with that in mind, I'm gonna let y'all take over, and I'm gonna let you tell me in the comments what you think is the Dillinger Escape Plan's best album. What is their worst album? What are your favorite songs, your least favorite songs? I'm also gonna tell you to press this button to subscribe so you can get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.